Good morning, Galaxians, and welcome to another live edition of the Galaxy CDs, Rocks, and Flips Reseller Talk podcast. My name is Ryan, and I am your host today. A couple things on the agenda for today. We've got a What Sold recap catch-up because I didn't do it in the episode we did the other day, and I'm going to cover a little bit of reselling news because Poshmark did make an announcement kind of clarifying some things about what they were doing with their excessive listing removal policy. So let's get started there with some reselling news.
News updates.
So this was the big news over the end of last week and into this week, and it was what we covered extensively in the Monday podcast. If you listened to that, and if you didn't, go do that, please. I would appreciate it. But there was a lot of pushback on it. I've talked to any number of sellers, and it's kind of a mixed bag. Some sellers say they are leaving the platform. This was kind of the last straw. And others said they were just going to continue doing what they're doing until or unless there was a problem with Posh. And they did, to their credit, better late than never, make an announcement on their blog. Last week, we announced an excessive listing removal policy. We have heard and sincerely appreciate your feedback on the policy ahead of the May 1st launch. We want to provide clear guidance on what's allowed and confirm that thoughtfully refreshing your closet is still encouraged, which is what I kind of figured. We talked a little bit about it on Monday, but that was my assumption that this wasn't an attempt to like blanket ban you. Making changes, refreshing things in your closet, delisting, relisting things, removing things that were sold elsewhere. But the original policy release was so vague, which I had said was maybe on purpose, but now they have clarified. So what you can do, refresh listings that haven't sold in 60 plus days. You're welcome to refresh older listings to keep your closet vibrant and up to date. The policy is about how often you revisit your listings, not how you do it. Improve your refreshed listings. This is probably a big one, and I did talk about this a little bit on Monday as well. Add new photos, update titles and descriptions, or use Smart List AI to enhance your listing. Just delisting and relisting the exact same listing without making any changes is probably not what they're looking for. So they're asking you to improve these listings. Use in-app features to reach shoppers. Price drop, offer to likers are great ways to boost visibility. Remove listings when no longer available. If your item sells elsewhere or is out of stock, you can delete it from Poshmark. Now, I'm unsure. Obviously they're clarifying this. Someone had mentioned in the comments of that last video that they have deleted at times a couple of hundred listings to take to an on-site sale. It'll be interesting to see if that kind of mass removal gets flagged, because technically that would fall under this. Those are no longer available to be sold on Poshmark because I'm taking them physically somewhere else. Am I going to get dinged? Am I going to get a warning for deleting that? I guess time will tell. Continue using copy listing feature. Copy listing can be used to create similar listings anytime or to refresh existing listings after 60 days. They then provided a little more clarity on what they're discouraging people from doing: excessive deletion and relisting of the same item, removal and relisting in fewer than 60 days. So they want you to, in essence, create the best listing you think you can create up front, and then let that go for at least 61 days before you try to delete it and then relist it, or participate in any behavior that circumvents fair discovery, any action intended to gain unfair search or marketing advantages. They close by saying, as the marketplace evolves, so do our policies. Refreshing your listings remains an important part of a successful selling strategy. Our goal is to ensure it's done in a way that benefits the entire community. Together, we can keep Poshmark fresh, fair, and full of authentic discovery. Thank you for being part of our community. Bloody, bloody, bloody. So there you go. A little bit of clarity from Poshmark on what they're trying to accomplish over there with some of the changes that they've made. Again, a lot of feedback on that last podcast about sellers coming and going and making different decisions. I've talked about over the since the end of last year, a lot of sellers are in the process of making a decision about what they want to do in terms of the platforms that they sell on. Do they want to continue to sell kind of everywhere, or do they want to really start to focus on a handful of platforms that are bringing them the most success? And that seems to be a trend where a lot of sellers are just really consolidating what they're doing and where they're selling. So, really interesting stuff. Let me know if you're here in the chat what you think of any of that. Speaking of, let's get in here and say our good mornings. Big Dre, good morning. Thank you for coming out. Den Decor Depot, good morning. Had a very good past 8 days. Let's keep it rolling. Felt like the old eBay again. My sales over the last 2 or 3 weeks have been pretty solid. No complaints. I mean, you could always complain. You could always ask for more. But it's been pretty good overall. Etsy had a little bit of a lull, and now it has picked back up as well. I've had a couple of days where I've done almost as much net profit on Etsy as I have on eBay on about a third of the sales. So that's encouraging as well. Mercari, however, continues to be super slow. I'm now on 8 days straight with no sales on Mercari. So I have not cracked the code at Mercari. Lord Jake Ryan, good morning. Playroom, thank you for coming out. Brian Henry, good morning from the sunny Pacific Northwest. We had some pretty good storms yesterday, but it is sunny today. Once I wrap this up, I will be going on another of my illustrious bike rides. Big Dre says my niche store has 65 listings currently, 8 sales this month for a grand total of 591. That's a pretty good hit rate. I'm pleased with its performance and will continue to prioritize building this store all year. And that's what all of us should be doing, is finding the things that are working, whether it's Poshmark or not, whether it's eBay or not, Mercari or not, in my case, and really trying to maximize what we can do on those individual platforms and really focusing on those things that are working. Obviously, over the months, over the years, I've been a big proponent of cross listing. I still think that is a good strategy, but the shotgun approach that a lot of sellers take of just cross posting everything everywhere may not be the way to go, because some of them, as I say on occasion, the juice just isn't worth the squeeze. Chuck Witt, good morning. Good to see you. Dre says, I'm only listing a few items on the weekend on my primary store that has over 1,000 items. It still gives me a couple of sales a day at this rate. So yeah, that's you have to kind of keep tabs on what stores are doing what. Rebel Junk, Erin commented a couple of weeks ago that she had gone a couple of weeks without doing any listings on her eBay store and was still making some sales. So that's pretty good. With that having been said, let's see if I can find my things here. Let's talk about what sold last week. This is about 10 days worth of stuff now since we missed last week, but we're going to cover these fairly quickly. Over on Etsy, the Splendor of Jade, 4,000 Years of the Art of Chinese Jade Carving from 1974, hardcover in a dust jacket in a slipcase. So a real nice book from the 1970s. This was listed for $22.99, was in my 10% off sale, and sold for $20.69 plus shipping. This buyer actually came back later in the week and bought another book about Chinese jade that was only like $12 or $13, but between the two, it was essentially $40 odd worth of sales. So I will definitely take that. I paid $2.93 in fees. This sold through the offsite ad program, unfortunately, so $4.14 in the offsite ad fee. Ouch. Cost of goods sold, just 50 cents. My net profit on this bad boy, $13.12. Moving over to eBay. I talk about old military books all the time, and this was a kind of an interesting one because it was from the military, but it wasn't really military related. This was Contract Administration, Volume 2, the extension course from the Institute Air University from 1978. So this was about how the Air Force administers contracts for procurement and purchasing and stuff. It was part of a big lot of military books I picked up at an estate sale for 38 cents on average. Listed for $24.99. I got an offer of $21, which I went ahead and took. $3.63 in fees. Again, 38 cents cost of goods sold, $16.99 profit on this book. Old medical textbook, Neurological Evaluation of the Psychogenic Patient. I have no idea, frankly, what psychogenic means, but there you go. 1982. This was a hardcover from Spectrum Publications, listed for $24.99. It got a watcher on eBay. I sent out my normal 15% off offer and sold it for $21.24 plus shipping. This, I believe, sold internationally. No sales tax. I paid $3.96 in fees, $1.81 for a promoted listing fee, 94 cents. My cost of goods sold, net profit, $14.53 for this old medical textbook. A Child's First Cookbook from 7 to 12 by Alma S. Locke or Latch from 1950, a Heart Happy Hour book, hardcover in its dust jacket. Dust jacket had quite a bit of wear on it, but the book was in reasonably good condition. This was listed and sold on eBay for $24.99 plus shipping. I paid $4.80 again in fees, $2.27 in promoted listing fee. My cost of goods sold was $0. This came from the aforementioned Erin Rebel Junk and the donation that she made to the cause. So this was free to me as part of a big pickup. Net profit $17.92 for an old cookbook from the 1950s. Speaking of cookbooks, next Thursday, I have got a massive cookbook sale over on Whatnot, if that's your jam. Another one on eBay, The Faith of Our Fathers by James Cardinal Gibbons. This is from 1904. Cool old book by the John Murphy Company, a hardcover. This was, again, part of a 650-odd book lot that I picked up late last fall, $23.99 plus shipping. $4.44 again in fees, $2.09 in promoted listing fees. That 38-cent cost of goods sold left me with a net profit of $17.08. Again, old religious books, love them. Will pick them up pretty much any chance I get. This was part of the big 1,800-odd book lot that I picked up several months ago. This was Pride in the Dust by Alan Gold and Sally Harrison from 1997, an illustrated, almost coffee table-sized trade paperback about horse racing. $25 was the offer price that I received on this. I think I had it listed for $27.99 plus shipping. $4.79 again in fees, $2.26 in ad fees, 50 cents cost of goods sold, profit $17.45. Just sold this, had just picked this up not long ago. Fairbairn's Crests of the Families of Great Britain and Ireland. This from 1992, published by Dorset Publications, a hardcover in its dust jacket, listed for $25.99 and sold within like 2 days for full price. Plus shipping and tax, $35.01 was the buyer's total. I paid $5.22 in fees. This was also part of a big lot that cost me just 50 cents. Net profit, $20.27. Another old art book, again from that 1800 book lot, Art Nouveau Jewelry by Vivienne Becker from 1985, a first printing illustrated hardcover in its dust jacket from E.P. Dutton. Dust jacket had a little bit of fading on it, but this book was fairly hard to find, listed and sold for $32.99 plus shipping. $6.22 in fees. Another promoted listing sale, $3 for the fees there. Cost of goods sold, 50 cents. Net profit, $23.27. Art books can be really hit or miss. Some of them are super valuable, and some of them are next to worthless. A buck. They don't have any value. This one, not bad. $33 essentially. Just sold this one overnight, last night, over on Etsy. Du Bois, a pictorial biography by Shirley G. Du Bois from 1978, published by Johnson Publishing. Hardcover in its dust jacket, listed for $39.99, sold with my 10% discount for $35.99 plus shipping. $4.27 in fees, no ad fees, thankfully. This was a part of a buy I did at an estate where there were a bunch, I've talked about this estate sale before, a bunch of African-American biography and history books, which were on a bookcase that was hidden behind a door. So I don't know if nobody had even bothered to try to close that door and see them. I'll root around a little bit. I'll open and close doors. And I opened this door and it was like angels singing. There was this whole shelf of really, really good African-American history and biographies. They were $1 a piece. I bought almost all of them, and they have been fantastic. This one, $35.99 plus shipping. $30.72 ended up being the net profit on this one over on Etsy. Another one on Etsy. This from the big 15,000 book lot from 3 summers ago. Human Anatomy and Physiology and Hygiene by Joseph C. Martindale from 1872. Illustrated hardcover, really interesting old book. These old medical textbooks are really fascinating. This sold on Etsy for $40.49 as part of my sale plus shipping. $4.70 in fees. This did sell through the offsite ad program, so $6.88 in the offsite fee. 4 cents. My cost of goods sold, $28.87 net profit. I'll take that every day. Old yearbooks, talk about them all the time. Will generally almost always grab them if I can get them for $2-3 or less. These were 2 out of 3 that I own from Belmont High School in Dayton, Ohio. I think I've still got either 1974 or 1977. I can't remember which, but this is 1975 Belmont High School Bison Yearbook and 1976. These sold for $23.99 each after a cost of goods sold of just $2. So real nice sale plus combined shipping. Ended up being $32.66. Again, these yearbooks, not necessarily fast movers, but they almost always eventually sell and bring pretty good money. This is a set I have gotten a lot of really lowball offers on over probably I've had these for 8 months, something like that. And I just wasn't willing to part with them because they were so unusual. It was such a hard set to find. So this is A Study of War, a 2-volume set by Quincy Wright from the University of Chicago Press, hardcover set from 1944. I had these listed for $89.99. And I kept getting messages about what's the lowest you'll sell them for? What's the lowest you'll sell them for? And I kept sending out the same offer, 15% off, $76.49. And nobody pulled the trigger on it. I even had a guy on Etsy that we went back and forth. And he finally messaged me and said he would buy them at that price. And then again, crickets, nothing, never heard from the guy again. I finally got my number, $76.49 plus shipping for this 2-book set. I paid $12.90 in fees, $6.45 in ad fees. My cost of goods sold for these 2 books was just 76 cents. Net profit, $57.55. Another old book, this from the 1880s, The Beautiful Story, a companion book to the Holy Bible and Golden Gems. 1988 hardcover in actually pretty decent condition, all things considered. The cover was starting to split a little bit at the front hinge, but for a book of that age, I thought it was in remarkably good shape. Listed and sold to someone, I believe in Canada, $84.99 plus $60.43 in shipping. Ouch. I am so glad that this did not sell through the offsite ad program because 15% of $60 is no joke. Order total was $145.42. Fees I paid $14.06. Shipping cost was exactly $60.43 to send this out by this. The buyer paid for international priority. This was a pretty heavy book. This was, again, part of that 1,800 book lot. So I was into this for just 50 cents. My net profit, $70.43. Pretty decent. And that is that. That is my flip of the week for this week. And not a bad way to wrap up a 10-day period of sales. I will definitely take it. Let's get back here into the chat. If you have any comments on any of those things that sold, if you haven't already left them in there, let me know and I'll be happy to answer them. Den Decor says I had a few U.S. Coast Guard civilian manuals and guides I did really well with. Again, they're kind of like the old yearbooks for me. If I find a big stack of old military books, whether they're fairly recent or fairly old, I generally will go ahead and grab them unless they're asking a fortune for them, which typically they're not. They're usually pretty competitively priced. Brian Henry, daily listing for a couple days in every 2-week cycle. I don't list while getting a truckload of auction lots prepared to go to a local auction sale. Gives me a break. And this is interesting because this is a topic that actually came up on a Facebook group I'm in yesterday. Someone was talking about doing listings and how you stay focused and how you don't go crazy doing listings. And sometimes they feel like they can just list all day, and sometimes they do 5 and they're ready for a break. And how do you determine what you want to do? And What I answered and what I normally do, and we've talked about it here before, is I've got kind of a weekly goal in mind. I know I want to get to whatever the number is, 120, 130, 140 listings in a given week. And then I look by day. Am I going to go sourcing? Am I going to go do this? What can I do on those given days? And some days it might be 5, some days it might not be any, some days it might be 30 or 35. Am I doing a YouTube show? Am I doing a whatnot auction? What does my day look like, so that I don't set myself a goal that's overwhelming on any given day, but by the end of the week I want to be able to get to where I want to get to. Sometimes life throws you a curveball. For instance, I talked about last week how there is not going to be a show next Wednesday because I had a estate company that reached out to me and wanted me to come up and look at their warehouse and go ahead and pick through one entire wall. I still don't know. That is next Wednesday. I don't know how many books are involved. I don't know what genres. I don't know anything about it. So I don't plan to do any listings. Don't plan to do the YouTube live next Wednesday. So that day will be a 0 for me. However, in the last 2 days, I've had 2 more estate companies reach out. So I've had to change my goal for the week because I'm sourced yesterday and I'm also sourcing tomorrow. I went up to a sale yesterday. They're preparing for a sale. They asked me to come in and see if I wanted to make an offer on the entire lot. Per my normal rule, it was not a really good collection of books. There was a lot of very low value stuff there. So I told the seller, I said, I'm not interested in making an offer on all of this, but if you would allow me to go through it, I'll be happy to go through and see what I would be interested in. And because they showed me the ones that they were not going to try to sell, I'll go through and pick out the ones that I would be interested in, and I'll make you an offer on those. As it ended up, I found just short of 50 books. I offered them $100 for the whole stack. I think they were thrilled with that. They were happy. Obviously, I wasn't able to help them clear out the entire sale, which I'm sure they're disappointed about. But even she said, I don't blame you. I wouldn't take all of these either. So that was a win. I got what I think will probably be close to $1,000 worth of books for $100, which is a deal I will take. I was hoping it would be a little bit more because I was actually down to my last, believe it or not, 12 boxes of books to be worked. So I was ready for some estate sellers to reach out to me. And here we are. I've got 3 of them in the span of a week. Aaron, Rebel Junk, good to see you. Taking you all running with me today. So I'll just be listening. Nice. I see your runs on Facebook. That's awesome. Media Picker, hello. Better late than never. Absolutely. Even if you're on team replay and really, really late, that's all good too. I don't mind that at all. Den Decor says bills are my motivation. That and the ghastly memories of terrible corporate former bosses. Sometimes you need some hardship for motivation. I've talked about my rapid decision to become a full-time reseller, and it was kind of the same thing. I was having, reasonably good success, and having owned a business previously, I was pretty confident that I could do this. But just walking away from a traditional full-time job and deciding to go full-time doing this in the span of about 45 days does apply a certain amount of pressure to what you're trying to accomplish, and it keeps you on task. As I've talked about, also I'm a big believer in the goal setting, like we just talked about. I have a plan for every week, for every day of that week. I generally am not planning out much further in advance than that, because things change so quickly. Like, for instance, with the multiple estate sellers reaching out, that's not something that you can really predict. So I try not to go too crazy on it, but almost every week, I've got a plan where I want to get to for the week, and I'll break that down into individual days so that I can keep myself on track. Because it's really easy if you're not super self-disciplined, or you don't have something. I write mine down. I've talked about the planners that I offer on Amazon. I use that type of sheet to keep myself on task, because I know it would be very easy to either forget things or just decide, hey, you know what? I'm just going to go do something else, which is totally fine to do if you keep that like weekend goal in mind. If I decide this afternoon I want to go for an extra long bike ride and sacrifice 10 listings, I know at some point over the next couple days I've still got to do those to get caught up. So you got to know yourself and know your own strengths and weaknesses, which is not always our strong suit as humans. Media Picker says my eBay sales have died this week. Only 7 sales since Sunday. How is everyone else doing? Again, mine pretty consistent. I'm noticing here recently like a midweek fall off, like Tuesday, Wednesday, my normal, 15, 16, 18 sales is more like 6, 8 midweek. And then it picks back up as we get into the weekend. Uh, as we have talked about for the last month, there are so many external pressures on people right now that I think it is a challenging environment for all sellers, especially those of us that are selling in what you might consider non-essential categories, media, books, CDs, whatever. It's not something that people have to have. And when the news media is talking about the potential of bare store shelves in the next 4, 6, 8 weeks, consumers may be spending their money stocking up on those like hard goods supplies, to be prepared for what may be coming down the pike with things not being readily available. It's a very interesting time, to say the least. Then Decor says I've had a very good past 8 days. Change to 10% markdown sale, 12% dynamic promoted on $20 and under items, and 8% dynamic on more expensive. Again, multiple strategies. We talked about a little bit on the Monday show, and I've mentioned it also on a couple of Facebook groups I'm in, utilizing the tools that are there. As much as we hate to have to mark stuff down or pay a promoted listing fee in order to kind of juice the sales a little bit, that's the world we live in now as resellers. And if we're not fully take advantage of those tools, if we're just throwing listings up and hoping that they will sell, I don't think at this time in particular that strategy is going to work. I'm not saying that Media Picker is not doing those things, but I know a lot of sellers are still reticent to try to run promoted listings or run a sale or do a markdown or offer a coupon. And all companies advertise. It doesn't matter how big they are. Amazon advertises. Car dealerships advertise. Everybody does some sort of advertising, runs some sort of sales. We as resellers are not going to be immune from that, in my opinion. I know a lot of sellers don't want to do it, but especially given where we're at right now, I feel like it might be something that if you're not doing, you might want to consider. Then Decor Depot says set a routine, and then if there are events that disrupt your routine, figure out what you need to do to get back on task. Yep. And again, everybody's going to be different about how they do those things, how they create a strategy to keep them on task over the course of a day, a week, a month. Some people need, a lot of stuff written down. Other people are just in a habit, in a routine that they can just duplicate day after day without having to really pay much attention to it. Again, knowing our own strengths and weaknesses is how you can navigate that. Playroom says Tuesday and Wednesdays are absolutely dead. Yeah, that has been, I wouldn't say absolutely dead, but it is definitely different than kind of that, for me, Thursday through Sunday window, which is where it's, for me, been super, super busy. But that midweek, man, Tuesday, Wednesday, rough, very rough. Denticor says we buy in bulk, so we have nice margins to do those things. That is true. And again, it depends on what you're offering, what you're selling, what you're buying, what categories you're in. And as we talk about, your money's made on the buy. So I know there's a lot of times, like for instance, that sale I went to yesterday, I could have bought all those books that were low value, and I could have done bundles, and I could have made that work. But I just made the choice that because I've got 2 more opportunities in the next week to capitalize on a pretty large selection of books, it just didn't make financial sense for me to overbid against myself to get a bunch of stuff that is, I'm going to have to lot them up in 2s or 3s to get $10 sales out of them. And I'm just not at a point where that's kind of what I'm trying to do. So you again, you got to think about, if I want to run promotions, maybe I can't pay as much for stuff, or I've got to mark stuff up a little higher to account for that. Whatever your math is to make that work. Um, I've talked about how I handle offers. When I create a listing, I do my research and I decide I'm going to price whatever this book at 19.99, and I'd be willing to take 17 bucks for it. I will make that my minimum acceptable offer, and that's kind of where I'm at then for the foreseeable future. I will run it eventually on sale. I will send out offers. I will entertain offers that are within kind of that range that I've set. But those are the kind of numbers that I'm trying to make, and I try to stick to that as best I can. Media Picker says I list daily, promote all listings, and run constant sales. Just a slow time for me at the moment. And I think that'll come back because I'm seeing still a ton of videos in my YouTube feed about how CDs are really starting to pop off again. I don't know necessarily that it's like high value stuff or if it's like when the record resurgence started, a lot of people out there shopping the dollar bins. But CDs are definitely making a comeback, and I think that will come back to all of us that sell in that category. I saw an interesting video the other day, and Brandon, you might want to comment on this as well. A guy who sells used CDs, and he's thinking about possibly starting to sell new as well with this new resurgence. And he was on a distributor's site and saw that 6 of that distributor's top 15 sellers were SA, super audio CDs, which is a format that I frankly did not know they were even still making. These are really high quality, much better fidelity than even regular CDs. And they are apparently selling. And again, this is nothing like the heyday of CDs when they were selling, millions a day. But that format is doing pretty well. Brandon, I'd be curious or do you look for those? Have you had any? Are you seeing anything in there? I don't have any. I can't tell you the last time I even saw any out in the wild, but apparently that's a thing. Media Picker says I drafted 10 listings so far while working the day job today. Shh, we'll keep that on the DL. Big Dre, I used to upsell buyers multiple shirts, but I have been able to do that in a while. Like you said, it must be the economy and news. I think people are a little concerned. Mel, welcome. Good to see you. Dave, welcome once again. Mike Metco, hello. Hello to everyone in the chat. Let me know if there's anything else in particular that you're interested in speaking about today. If you're a Poshmark seller and you're here, please let us know in the chat what your opinion is on the recent changes and the recent update to those changes that we just covered as well. If you're an Etsy seller, lots of change going on over there as well. Let me know in the chat what your opinion is of any of that. Mercari doesn't really seem to be doing much of anything at the moment to try to kind of spark sales over there. But other than their constant giving of credits and discounts to potential buyers. But Media Picker says I come across one in the wild every once in a while. Obviously pretty scarce. Depending on the title, they can go for really good money. Yeah, it's something I will probably start looking for a little more. This sale that I was at yesterday, man, there were probably, I would guess, 2,500 CDs in this house. It was a huge, huge collection, mostly old classical stuff, which I personally have not had great success with selling. Give me old punk and old black and death metal and stuff like that. That stuff I do really, really well with. But man, the old classical stuff, unfortunately, just doesn't do well for me. Big Gray, I sold a super audio CD player last year for a few $100s. I know Japan used to sell a lot of those CDs. That's something I would probably be, I've tried to avoid like electronics here recently because I just don't want to go through the testing and sometimes the drama with getting them shipped out and all that kind of stuff. But that is probably a device I would be on the lookout for if I found a super audio CD player. Right now, with the sudden popularity and the newfound interest from manufacturers in making portable CD players, if I found some old Sony Discman or the Panasonic or whoever equivalent of those for a couple of bucks, I might be inclined to take a look at those as well, because that is, again, seems to be a burgeoning marketplace. So that'll be really interesting. Is the alt text on Etsy photos that Etsy is adding to use alt text on your photos? My understanding is that Etsy is using AI to automatically insert that on some photos, on some sellers' photos. I think it's a gradual rollout. I don't think it's everybody. I do not do it. Probably should, but I'm doing so many photos. Like I did a couple of listings today where there were 24 photos on eBay. Now, obviously, Etsy doesn't take that many, but to go in and do like alt ID on all of those photos would be more time than I want to take for those. So I don't do it. If Etsy figures out how to do that and how to do it correctly so that they're not, as we talked about in the show the other day, providing incorrect details that could potentially lead buyers who rely on that information to make a purchase to then make a bad purchase, I'd be all about it. I have no problem with them adding that stuff automatically, but I think it should be based on the details that we have put in to the listings, either through item specifics, the description, or the title. And my impression is that's not quite how it's working yet on Etsy. So that'll be really interesting. But I am not doing them, and I don't think Etsy is doing them yet on all photos. Then, of course, as I wish Etsy would offer store subscriptions, they definitely like when you list daily on there. Yeah, and it's a very rare day that I don't cross post something to Etsy. Some days it might be one or two items, depending on what I'm working on, but almost every day something is going over there. It is a much more kind of constrained inventory for me because of the fees. I've got, I don't know, 2,700 listings on Etsy as compared to 11,000 and change on eBay. But it is still, for me, a very productive site. I was watching a video from a a more serious bookseller than I last night. He's an antique bookseller, and he goes to like the book fairs in New York City. I mean, he's big time, and he's selling a lot of really like 1500s era $500 and $800 books, which is not really. I'm not finding a lot of inventory like that in the way that I source. But even he was talking about how productive Etsy has been for him as a bookseller. So as we've discussed here over the last few weeks, if you are a vintage and antique bookseller and you're not taking advantage of Etsy, it's absolutely something that you should at least have on your radar. Tinfoil hat time. The alt text on Etsy is to make more of the 15% marketing sales. Could very well be, because that is something I know that Google supposedly looks for as their, whatever they call it, crawling the web. So it could very well be. That fee is, whew, that is stout, man, stout. I, as I talk about, I try to remind myself that it is a sale I wouldn't have made, most likely, without Etsy pushing that into wherever it was discovered. So losing the 15% to make 60 or 70 bucks on a book, I guess is a fair cop, but it is still, you look at that number and you're like, oh, ouch. And I'm interested also because supposedly once you've reached in a calendar year or in a rolling year, $10,000, I believe the number is on in sales on Etsy, that percentage is supposed to drop to 12. And I have hit that dollar amount on a couple of different occasions as I track through my sales, and I've yet to see my offsite percentage change. Yes, it is, especially on higher dollar items and on the occasions where you'll have an overseas buyer that buys something. I've had that happen a couple of times where a buyer in Australia has bought a book that is, it's a fairly big, fairly heavy item. It's a $12.99 book, and shipping ends up being $45, $55, $65. And by the time you've paid the offsite ad fee to cover the total cost, including the shipping, it's a loser. You end up losing money on it. It's one of the reasons I stopped running sales outside the US on Etsy, so I can at least hold back that 10% of the item price in case somebody overseas does decide to buy it and I get caught in the offsite ad program. But yeah, that's that it can really, really be brutal. Big Gray says electronics are a hassle to test, but not as bad as video games. I don't bother with games because the testing is a lot more involved than, say, a CD or a DVD player. Yeah, I've pretty much, I really am not even looking for video games, but if I stumble across a decent sized stack of them, I'll take a look, see if there's anything there that I think might be interesting, particularly older vintage games. And I'll take a look at the disc. And if I know Brandon Media Picker has the resurfacer, but if it's got the least bit of marking on it, I will just pass because I don't have the equipment. I don't have all the old game systems to even really test. I don't It's not my forte. I don't want to invest in all that equipment to go through and test. And you can't tell, maybe a game boots up and it starts, but there's a glitch somewhere else on the game. I'm not trying to play through a whole game to figure out. It's just, it gets to be a lot. But hooking up, like I've got a TV sitting right kind of next to my workstation. I've got the cables right there. I've got an outlet. So it's not super difficult for me to actually hook something up and do the test, but in the time it takes me to unpack, hook up, test, whatever, a piece of electronics, then pack it up, get it ready, do the listing, I can list 10 or 12 books. It just makes more sense a lot of times to just continue doing what I'm doing, unless it's something that's really highly valuable for a $40 piece of electronics. It's not going to be worthwhile for me personally. It's just not my business model. Other people, that's where they make their living. So again, different strokes for different folks. You'll feel better if you don't look at the offsite ad fee. I was with Etsy before they made that. Mine is 12. Nice. Rub it in, dude. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, I was pretty late getting on Etsy, to be fair. I got to look at it because it's an expense I've got to account for. So I do have to keep track of it. But yeah, it is frustrating. And Etsy, sometimes they drive me nuts with the way they break down. I always want like a level of detail, but trying to figure out what my expenses are on any particular item on Etsy, there'll be like 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of stuff. There's the percentage of the payment processing. Then they break out separately the percentage, the commission that they take, the final value fee, if you will, on the shipping separately from the item, even though they're the exact same percentage. You got a whole list of things that you've got to try to get into your accounting software. I'd really like it if they would consolidate that somehow. Then Decor says, I thought the 10K mark was you were just automatically enrolled and can't opt out. That is true. But as part of the reward for not being able to opt out is the percentage is also supposed to drop. So Recommerce Dave, since you enjoy your audio video tech, how much tech do you have with all your bike riding? Not a lot, actually. Years ago, I did. I had a power meter. I had a Garmin bike computer. I had the cadence and the speed sensor and all that. Now I've got my Garmin watch and a speed and cadence sensor, and that's it. I have, to be fair, a power meter and a Garmin computer on my wish list over on Amazon. But I think I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I'm in that boat where I'm being a little cautious about my expenditures because I don't know what's going to happen as we start to get into summer, and I'm not trying to drop $800 or $1,000 on some extra stuff for the bike when I can function pretty well without it. Most of my cycling, my hardcore training that I do is on Zwift, and the Zwift ride that I have has all that on it. So when I'm doing an actual training ride, as opposed to just a casual, I'm going to go out and ride, I've got all that data. So I'm on the fence. I'd love to do it, but I just haven't pulled the trigger. Mary, good morning. Welcome to the show. I hope you had a great time. It looked like from all the pictures I've seen on Facebook that you and Mike and everybody had a really good time down in Nashville. Big Dre says, my electronics usually sell out quickly. I only have 3 electronics items in my store currently, and I'll probably put them up for auction since they didn't sell as quick as the rest. And again, that is a perfect example of someone keeping track of their inventory, knowing these things are selling, these things are not. I need to do something because I want to cash out of these things so I can get into something more productive. Knowing your numbers, knowing your business it makes all the difference in the world, as opposed to just kind of throwing stuff out there and not worrying about it. Lord Jake Ryan says Etsy is still working on that earnings tab in the order, so hopefully it will display the things we want how we want it. They have been making some changes, especially on the website, moving things around, making navigation a little bit easier. They are trying to implement some additional tools for sellers as well. So, you know, kudos to Etsy where they're due. They're at least making an effort to make our job easier. Hopefully, they don't just raise the fees in order to pay for all that. Good, good. I'm glad, Mary. I'm glad it was a good time. I think you guys are doing a live show. Is that tonight, where you'll probably be talking about that experience? Never sold on Etsy, but it's good to be informed of the changes. And it's always like I talked about with the Poshmark change when I discussed that on Monday. It's always good to have an idea, in my opinion, again, what some of the other platforms are doing, because as these things work or do not work, you may see other platforms start to implement them. I talked about eBay in particular. They offer a ton of tools, some of which cost us money to promote listings, and particularly older listings. And if they look at Poshmark kind of putting the brakes on delisting, relisting, and sell similar as a workaround to try to keep old listings fresh, might they be like, that, my friends, looks like a really good idea, and start to track how often we as sellers are using that to, I don't want to say game the system, but essentially to work that loophole to get our listings back to the top. So even if you don't sell on a platform, when someone makes an announcement, look at what happened last spring, for instance, when Mercari announced they were going fee-free for sellers. Poshmark tried to jump on that bandwagon. I believe Depop made some changes to their structure as well. So you had other sites that very quickly reacted to that. Now, they've all had different experiences with how well that worked or didn't. But when you see one business decide, hey, we're going to try this thing, even if it's not your business, it's probably something to be aware of, which is why I try on the Monday main podcast episode to cover as many sites and as many pieces of information as I can, because you just never know when the platform that you sell on is going to decide that's a trick that they want to employ, and it might cost you money. Mary says, yes, 8 o'clock Eastern. Thanks so much. It's at Mike Metco Meetups. If you're not following them over on Instagram or on YouTube, they're all about meetups and YouTube lives. They actually posted on their Instagram today for this show. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think so, but it was my point. So of course I do, but I appreciate that. But yeah, it is being aware of kind of holistically what's going on, whether it's on a platform, whether it's, changes at UPS that they're making that you may then see implemented at FedEx or with the United States Postal Service. They're always watching each other. So we got to watch all of them, unfortunately, to keep tabs on things. I'm going to take a quick drink here. Let me know if you have anything else you would like to discuss. We're at about 50 minutes, so let's give it another 10 minutes or so, depending on how the conversation goes. Let me know what else is on your mind out there. And that is just water this morning. I've already had my 2 coffees. I'd be bouncing off the walls if I was drinking another one. Ooh, yeah. Anybody else have any comments on how their sales are going? Any other YouTubers that would like to comment on how their YouTube channels are going? I continue to see lots of changes at YouTube, which so far don't seem to be affecting my channel, but a lot of people talking about some of the updates recently that are kind of causing them some issues with ad revenue and view counts and that sort of stuff. So let me know if any of you are seeing anything like that as well. As always, quick shout out. Thank you to everyone who comes out for these shows on Wednesday and who participates in the chat, answering other questions. I talked about this on someone else's show or on a Facebook post recently, how much I appreciate the community that has built up around here, where all of you kind of help each other using this as kind of that venue. So, and as always, quick hat tip to Liz over at Value Added Resource, who gave the channel a shout out in a post yesterday regarding sales over on eBay. Interestingly, I talked about in the show on Monday that I had received a solicitation for a 15% off sale on eBay in the first week of June, that it was to be fully funded by a seller. eBay was not participating in the funding of it, and that then you would be billed down the road for whatever the percentage was of that. And that is, as Liz pointed out, which I did not think about at the time, was kind of an interesting situation, getting that big bill all at once, because it sounds like um, you're going to get paid the full amount of that item up front, and then that's going to get the 15% is going to get deducted at the back end. The other side of that is, of course, that you're going to pay the full value fee on the full amount of the sale, because that percentage is not getting deducted until later. So it's a way that 15% discount is going to end up being a lot more than 15%, because you're paying the full final value fee on that percentage that you're actually not going to get at the end. So if you're considering participating in that, think about that as well. Interestingly, I did send the message in to participate in that sale. They say very specifically, you will receive an email from a specific eBay email account in order to fully opt in. And as of this recording, I still haven't received that email. So that's interesting. They're also apparently running another sale, which is, looks like, for automotive and certain subcategories in automotive. It's a slightly lesser discount, but that one is going to be partially funded by eBay. I believe the article said they're paying 30% of whatever the discount is. So that's another way that eBay is trying to kind of goose sales. So let me know if you received that, if you saw in that category. Be real interested to know how people are doing over there. Let me blow this back up so I can see it. Media Picker says, I just put out a video today about someone stealing my listing photos and using it in their listing. Can't do anything about it. I take it as a compliment. I can't say I've seen, like, probably it has happened with as many listings as I have and as many photos as I take. I probably would expect that my photos are somewhere else as well. But man, how lazy do you have to be? I would feel like it's almost as much work to find someone else's listing. I guess when you're doing comp research, if you find one you like, you just download the picture right away. But man, what a hassle. People, I don't know. And that, I talk about a lot. I did a video a couple of years ago about how bad resellers make it more difficult for those of us who are trying to do the right things, because you end up giving a bad rap to everyone. You know, a seller like that, for instance. So they're using your photo of your item. Their item's not going to match in theory. It may have a scratch or a crack or a blemish or whatever in a place where yours does not. They're going to send that item out, and the end user, the buyer, is going to get it and say, well, this doesn't look like what I ordered. And they may write off eBay altogether and say, it's just a scam. People are just sending out junk instead of the right things. These things, again, from a much broader perspective, do matter. It may not affect you individually today, but every time a buyer decides that they're not going to buy on a platform anymore, be it Mercari or Etsy or any of them, that is a potential loss to all of us. So it's a big point that I harp on, is that bad sellers make it more difficult for everyone. Dave says, agree. It will be interesting to see what's happening in the UK with eBay and Vinted and drifts to other countries. Yeah. In Europe in particular, eBay runs a ton of experiments. They've made further changes in Germany that have not rolled out yet to other parts of Europe or to the UK. They've obviously made huge changes in the UK with things like simple delivery, really trying to differentiate between private sellers on the one hand and registered business sellers on the other hand, how fees are handled between those two groups, buyers paying fees, sellers paying fees, shipping methods, all of that stuff, all of those experiments as they play through may end up eventually coming to other markets as well. So again, I know primarily my listenership is here in the US, but I try to keep tabs on what's going on over in Europe because those things in a lot of cases are precursors to things ending up happening over here. So we can be mad about it twice. Callie Debs, good morning. Welcome to the show. We're at about an hour. I'll make this the last call for anybody who has anything to say today, any questions that you might have, any comments on anything that we have talked about. Speak now or forever. Well, not forever, hold your peace, but for 2 weeks, hold your peace. Reminder, we will not be here next week. I will be up in Dayton sourcing a warehouse full of books. So that'll be fun. If you're interested in seeing my Whatnot shows, I do have 3 shows coming up over the next 2 weeks. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. will be vintage kids books. Then next week, Tuesday and Thursday, also both at 11 a.m. I've got a ton of old ancient history books, Egypt, Inca, Maya, Mesopotamia. That is on Tuesday. And then a bunch of cookbooks. I mean a bunch of cookbooks. On Thursday, those shows are already loaded. So if you find me on Whatnot, Galaxy CDs Rocks, you can take a look at what is in those sales as well. Let's see what we got here. Dave says we've had those 15% promos for about a year, participated in one, and yes, you get paid in full. And then 6 weeks, you get a charge to your account with absolutely no breakdown, which sales were included. Yes, once again, no, no transparency. You don't get a breakdown of which items were purchased, even when they purchased the item, because it's being essentially purchased at full price to you. There's no indication from what I understand. Now, I've not participated in one of these, but the consensus seems to be there's no indication on that order that that sale was made through this promotion. I guess I would probably assume that it is, but pretty much everything I sell during that week or 10 days, whatever it is I'm going to be on the hook for 15%. I would just assume that up front and kind of budget that into my planning for 45 to 60 days down the road that I'm going to get hit for 15% of my total sales on the platform for that week. Again, as I talked about in that show on Monday, I don't like the way that is set up for a variety of reasons. Having that big chunk, like every time eBay makes a mistake and they don't charge fees. I think this happened in Australia late last year, where there were a bunch of sellers who didn't get charged fees for a pretty extensive period of time. And then they figured it out and they just announced they were going to hit them all at once and catch up all the fees. No, you can't do that to sellers. Most of us are on fairly limited cash flow. We don't have extra hundreds or thousands of dollars laying around to cover a big bulk expense like that. Now, again, in a case like this, where you know it's going to happen, you can kind of budget for it. But in a case like that, you just assume those fees are being charged, and then you find out they weren't, and you're like, oh boy, I'm in trouble. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. I know there's some good inventory in that warehouse because I've already picked it twice. I'm not sure what section I'm getting access to this time. They've probably got, I'd hate to even guess, 20,000 books in this warehouse, and they're not booksellers. They just acquire them through buying estates. They no longer actually do on-site estate sales. They'll go in and make an offer on all the contents of a house, and then they'll just remove everything to their warehouse. They will sell some things online. They have some in-person sales. They lease a small like warehouse office space next to their main warehouse where they'll do in-person sales. So their setup is very different. They're not doing these kind of live in-person events. They're just making an offer and taking all the contents out. But the downside for them is they have ended up with literally tens of thousands probably of books, and it's just not something that they are equipped from a manpower standpoint to mess with. I think they know there's value there, so they've been a little hesitant to just get rid of them, but they're running out of room is where they're at right now. Then Decor Depot says, have a good week. It is time to sell. Indeed, it is. Mike, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I hope it's informative and enjoyable. Big Dre says, sold an item last month for $200 free shipping. Cost $119 to ship to Alaska. So I will remove Alaska, Puerto Rico, and Hawaii on certain items. Are there any other states to exclude? Now, that's an interesting one because my understanding was that Alaska, Puerto Rico, and Hawaii were going to be added into the international shipping program to kind of avoid that very thing. I've not looked into it further. I didn't opt into that because what I sell is not big enough that I ever get really jammed up with that. But you might look into that, look into the criteria for eBay International Shipping Program, because I recall that we talked about it maybe a year ago now, that they were going to add those three at least to that program so that you could ship there more economically. So you might look into that. Those for me would be the big ones. Those got put into a different zone a year or two ago that is like super, super expensive. And again, size and weight, shipping to Alaska or Hawaii can get really, really costly. So I can certainly see where you would want to exclude those, but look into the international shipping program and see if you can do that. Miss Lachey, let's start over. I just got here. I don't even remember what all we've talked about. You'll have to be on team replay this week, but I appreciate you coming out. It's always good to see you. Yes, but if you know your numbers, you should know if you aren't being charged correctly. So back charges should be budgeted. I agree. I can always tell. I haven't had it happen very often, but I've had a couple of instances where I know that there was a mistake in the charges, and I planned for that to be the case. I talked about, I think each of the last 2 weeks, I do my accounting on a daily basis. Like when I ship, right after I ship my orders in the morning, I transfer all of the information, the sales, the fees, the shipping costs, all of that goes into my accounting software on a daily basis. So I know, I can tell through my reconciliation of looking at the numbers that are on the eBay site versus what I know they should be, if something is missing. Unfortunately, I don't think most sellers, as we talked about, like going into tax time, there are sellers who are literally scrambling around on April 12th with their shoebox full of receipts trying to figure out what their expenses were for a given year. And that is just a recipe for disaster, not only from a tax standpoint, but just from knowing if you're really actually making any money or not. Again, everybody's business is different. You can choose to run it as you will, but I have always been a big proponent that keeping track of your accounting on at least a fairly regular basis, whether you do it weekly, maybe I'm overkill doing it daily, but I don't, even from a week's standpoint, on maybe 2 sourcing trips and 100 to 150 sales during the course of a week, I don't want to go back at the end of the week and try to have to sort through all of that. I want to do it on a daily basis so it's just done and handled. And if there's an issue, I'm kind of aware of it up front and can get ahead of it. With that, my friends, I believe we're going to put a bow on this week's episode. I hope everybody's having a great week. We will be back most likely next week on Monday with a full episode of the podcast, bringing you all of the reselling news. And then again, next Wednesday, no show. I will be on the road. Thank you to everyone who came out and participated today. And until next time, it's time to sell. Thanks, guys.